1999 will be remembered by Canadians for an extraordinary event. Canada was involved in the most recent large-scale refugee assistance effort. According to an estimate by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, more than 860,000 Kosovo Albanians were being driven out of their land by the Serbian armed forces in an apparent effort to cleanse Kosovo from its ethnic Albanians. A human tragedy of apocalyptic dimensions unfolded, resulting in the largest refugee crisis since the Second World War.
When the plane landed, the reception was so warm, we felt like we were coming to a wedding and us being the most respectable guests.
Upon arrival in Canada, things were different, of course, because Canada was organized to helping us, so like they accommodate us on military base of Borden, which now became second home for next, again, month and a half here in Canada.
They talk to you. With the beginning of NATO bombing in March of 1999, what we saw was a humanitarian catastrophe that was without parallel in any of our experience.
It was the product of a horrible revival of Nazi ideology within Serbia. A terrible thing to happen after the Serbs had suffered so much during the war from the Nazi occupation. They were led astray and adopted these same racist policies against the Albanians that the Nazis used against the Jews, calling Albanians subhumans and Turks and threatening to build more mosques in Belgrade and et cetera, et cetera.
Various segments of Serb paramilitary and military forces would show no mercy even to young, innocent children. Known as one of the survivors of the Garden Massacre in Podujevo, Saranda brings back the memories of a horrible hate crime. 19 frightened children and their mothers were lined up against the wall and sprayed with machine gun fire. Miraculously, she and 4 of her cousins would escape death.
When everything happened, when I lost my family during the war, it was on the 28th of March, 1999. My aunt was crying, she was talking to them in Serbian, and I could understand was that they're only children. They shot her in front of us.
According to United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, even before NATO's bombing of Serbia, 200,000 Albanians had fled Kosovo. The fierce conflict that had started in 1998 between the Kosovo Liberation Army and the Serbian police, army, and paramilitary forces made Albanian civilians an easy target of beatings, rapes, and killings. The massacre of Rachak of January 1999 was the latest carnage.
Today we stand united against those who committed this crime. This crime against humanity. The deaths in Rachak demand justice, and justice must be seen to be done.
The condemnation by the United Nations was meant to send a strong signal to the Serbian leadership. But it would take more than just a war of words to convince the defiant Milosevic to withdraw his military machine from Kosovo. In the meantime, oppression and violence made life miserable for Albanians.
Simple to describe this will be two words probably: anger and fear. Anger because of all those atrocities what on daily basis were happening by Serbs police and military force all over Kosovo, and fear because we fear every day for our kids will be returning safe home, and our family had a fear of what will happen to us, or will I return from work safe at home.
On March 24th, 1999, after repeated threats, NATO launched an air campaign against military and civic targets in Serbia, which lasted 78 days. A furious Milosevic appeared determined to finish his job by expelling all Albanians from Kosovo, pushing them south and west to the neighboring Macedonia and Albania.
They told us to leave our house within 4 to 5 minutes and not to close the doors. Straight to the railway stations, get lost, they ordered us. When we got there, we saw a huge crowd. Around 3 in the morning, they put us in freight trains. Through an opening, we saw dead bodies as we passed the village of Lipian.
The coexistence between Albanians and Serbs in the Balkans has not been an easy one.
Oh, it's been extremely difficult. There are profound historical reasons for this. First of all, that the Serbs, as they were invading, pushed the Albanians or Illyrians as they were up and out of their traditional homes, up into the highlands and the mountains. That was the beginning of the bad blood.
Well, I think when you read the media, you get the impression that the Kosovo issue is quite recent. As a historian, let me stress that the Kosovo crisis goes along with the creation of Yugoslavia after the First World War, or was originally the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. In any Yugoslavia, whether it was the first Yugoslavia between the First and Second World War, or the Yugoslavia that Tito created, or the third Yugoslavia that emerged under Milosevic, or the Yugoslavias that emerged even after Milosevic, there was always a Kosovo question. So Kosovo has deep historic roots, and I would certainly stress that for Albanian people living in Kosovo, Yugoslavia was never a solution to any of their problems. For the most part, Albanians suffered in a contemporary sense and in a historic sense in Yugoslavia. And what we're seeing now in the present day sense is finally what we hope is a solution to this long-term, now century-old dilemma of Albanians living in Kosovo under essentially a type of occupation.
During the rise of nationalism in the Balkans in the 19th century, Albanians' very existence was put in danger. The revival of a greater Serbia, a modern resurrection of the medieval Serb Empire, refueled ethnic tensions. The pressure from the great powers and Russia assisted the Serbs in breaking away and gaining independence from the Ottoman Empire. On the other hand, the presence and the rights of Albanians in Kosovo were ignored. This was clearly manifested at the Treaty of London and the Conference of Bucharest in 1913, held soon after the defeat of the Turkish army during the First Balkan War. In these two major international conferences, the great powers recognized the Serbian occupation of Kosovo. The perception of Albanians as Turks played an important role in this decision. Although Albanians had adopted the religion of their conquerors, they preserved their own distinct language and culture, two major marks of their identity.
As a specialist on Albania and Kosovo, and more generally Albanians, I tend to view Albanians as a secular people, in the sense that Albanians have their religion. The thing that intrigues me most about people's knowledge of Albanians is that they do tend to view them as a Muslim people. And this is a mistake, largely to me, because it neglects the tremendous religious diversity that exists in Albanian lands. I point to Albania as a great example, not just of the presence of Islam, but the presence of Catholicism and, of course, Albanian Orthodoxy. Albania has always established itself as a country that showed tremendous religious tolerance. And one thing, if you know Albanian history well, you know that Albanians are not unified by religion. The idea of Albania as being a Muslim country is used often against them in regrettable ways by some countries in the region to paint them with one single brush, but the Islamic identification has also worked in their favor on occasion. So it goes both ways, but in general, when I think of Albanians, I think of a secular people with a Muslim majority, with a Catholic population, with a Protestant population now, with an Orthodox population. So I view it as a religiously diverse part of the Balkans.
What do you think was the reason behind this massacre?
I believe that it is because we're Albanian, but to be honest with you, I always asked that question myself as well. I always wanted to know, you know, even if it is purely because we were Albanian, you know, what made them hate us so much, you know, to shoot women and children, you know, children from the age of 14 to 2 years old. I was 13 at that time. All my cousins were younger than me. I always questioned that, and I always thought about it, you know, what really made them do it. But I don't see any other reason apart from who we were.
The still prevalent perception of Albanians as a Muslim population was a key factor in prolonging the political career of Slobodan Milosevic. Although a communist by conviction, he managed to remain in charge of Serbia, posing as a protector of Christianity. His role in worsening the crisis was crucial.
He was the primary mover. He was a banker, a communist banker. Sounds like a contradiction in terms. A communist banker turned demagogue who found that exciting Serbs' nationalist passions by creating a whole web of lies and creating this mythology about Serbs suffering and the evil Albanians brought him to power and inflamed the public. But it was not just Milosevic. Now it's convenient to blame him for everything. But the Serb Orthodox Church played almost as big a role as Milosevic did, unfortunately, in whipping up passions and calling for revenge against the Turks, meaning Albanians and Bosnian Muslims.
I think that Milosevic's role in the destruction of Yugoslavia and aggravating the Kosovo situation cannot be understated in any way. It is the key factor in the destruction of Yugoslavia.
After the failure of the international community to protect the Muslims during the conflict in Bosnia, the renewed threats from NATO against Milosevic were received with some skepticism. This is how Maraton Ratchi, a Kosovo Albanian refugee living in Kitchener, recalls those events.
At the time when that happened, I was studying robotics and automation there. We knew approximately that it was going to happen that day, so I couldn't really focus in my classes. So what I did is I went to the computer lab and I was like reading the news all over, and I do remember the moment when it started, because behind me there was a girl from Vojvodina, or Novi Sad, which is a city north of Belgrade, and we were just minutes before that, we were talking to each other, and she said it's not going to happen, and I said I'm afraid it will, and not only it started, but it actually started in Novi Sad. Nobody expected that the first bombs were going to fall in Novi Sad.
As soon as the bombing started, the Serbian forces dragged Albanians from their homes and forced them to train stations or to the nearest border with Albania or Macedonia. The number of refugees increased dramatically, reaching the climax in June of 1999. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimated 862,000, almost half of the Albanian population in Kosovo. Another 500,000 were displaced internally. Ironically, the Serb authorities and media claimed that this massive expulsion was an exodus provoked by NATO bombings.
This theory was first brought up by Serbs, who were trying to justify their basically to put a blame on international community about people being fleeing Kosovo, not because of their atrocities.
The war was going on long before the NATO bombings. A lot of things going on in Kosovo. As I was living there, I was witnessing it. There were so many people that died before the NATO bombings. when I was in hospital, everyone that came to visit, different charities or whoever would come into the hospital, they would say that it was because of the NATO bombings that we were there. My cousins and I, we didn't want to say anything against that because we were in the hospital, and that would have put our life into danger, even though kind of it still was, but we couldn't really argue to that.
Before being transferred to more equipped camps, the refugees who decided to head towards Macedonia had to stay for several days in precarious conditions close to the Macedonian border.
I had covered a lot of terrorist aftermath stories, so I'd been to Nairobi when Al-Qaeda blew up the U.S. Embassy, and I knew the smell of death. I knew what it was like to be covering such tragic events. But to cover the refugees who were coming across into Macedonia in such large numbers, and to see the fear and concern about what they were leaving behind, that was really stunning, and it was quite difficult. But what I found also very inspiring was how these people handled their hardship, especially children. They were just wonderful to talk to and deal with, and how people were quite generous with each other. So it was actually quite an uplifting experience despite the darkness of the whole story.
It was a big field in which, like, simple tents displaced all over, and probably on place like 6 feet by 4 feet, something like that. We were about 8 from our family, and it was another family as well. At night we had to stay like 2-3 people awake to walk around, and then to sleep on shifts.
The 247,000 Albanian refugees who arrived in Macedonia shook this tiny country. The harsh reception by the Macedonian authorities manifested their fear that the conflict would spill into Macedonia, as well as the country's unpreparedness for such an influx of refugees. The conditions in the camps were extremely bad. The United Nations decided to intervene by airlifting 85,000 Albanians to 32 countries outside the immediate region. Canada was among the first countries to respond. Madame Lucienne Robillard, the then federal immigration minister, declared that her government was willing to take at least 5,000 refugees.
The discussions were, that we must engage, and that pretty well had support from the House of Commons as a whole. Jean Chrétien was the Prime Minister at the time, and he gave the appropriate lead to getting involved and assisting in the crisis.
Stankovic was one of those camps where the Canadian government had set up one of its field operation offices.
I was in charge of the emergency field office that was established by the Canadian government in Skopje, Macedonia, to deal with the refugee situation in Macedonia. The government of Canada had several field offices in the region because there were refugee populations in a number of different locations around the former Yugoslavia. And so in Macedonia itself, of course, there were several refugee camps. And so the Canadian government established a field office there to process the refugees from those camps that were in Macedonia. The project in the Balkans was going on for a number of months, and because it was an emergency situation, my department was in need of personnel to go there, had to take personnel from different offices to temporarily fit them into this emergency offices that we were running.
You just don't know, what it's like, and you look around, all around you, there's just tents everywhere, from everywhere that you can see up the hills, and people just swarming around, and it was just the mass of people, and yeah, it is a bit overwhelming.
Raining days and no water, no enough food, lots of people together in one place, and but at least we would feel a little less safe.
The local people were unbelievable. I mean, the people that went ahead of me to set up all of this, they did a terrific job, and I just sort of came in as a warm body, but they set up all the logistics. They had to find, local people. We don't speak Albanian, and English wasn't widely spoken. And I guess the people sort of found them in a way, our interpreters, our drivers, people to help in our little office. And some of them were refugees themselves. They weren't in the camps because they had friends in Skopje, but, they had a lot on their minds. Like they had family that they didn't know what happened to. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. But when they were with us, they were 100% with us. And, we couldn't have done it without them.
It varied over time. At the height of the effort, we had perhaps 6 or 8 Canadian officers on site, but we also had 10 to 20 local persons working with us as well. So perhaps at the height of operations, there may have been 30 or more people working on the effort. And that's just in Macedonia. Recall that there were other offices in the region as well working to support that, plus a lot of effort going on in Canada. I think there were hundreds of people involved in the effort in Canada in receiving refugees and getting them settled.
I mean, it was a very simple program in a way, but because of the situation, because it was so dynamic and people were separated from their family members, they didn't always know whether they wanted to come or not. They knew they had to leave, but Canada wasn't necessarily the number one choice.
I think they were pleased and happy and grateful for the opportunity to go to Canada. But I know as well too it was a difficult decision for many of them. I think at the end of the day, many of them had very mixed emotions. They left their homes suddenly and under difficult circumstances, and I think for many of them it wasn't an easy decision to go to Canada.
I knew very little about Canada before coming to Canada. While we were staying at camp, I did have a little English back there, so I was involved in helping international organization for refugees who were helping us at that time, and I remember one day a lady from from Red Cross of Canada, she approached and I asked her where is she from, and when I told her my name, she said that we are looking for your family because your sister is wanting you to go there. We decided to come with first part of refugees who fled to Canada through this program for humanitarian evacuation. It was on May the 4th, I think, first.
In early April, the planned airlift to Canada was suddenly cancelled. Ottawa feared that Canada would help Slobodan Milosevic achieve his goal, getting rid of Albanians in Kosovo.
Well, we were, debating the issue in Parliament and getting Canada engaged with NATO in terms of trying to deal with the crisis that was taking place. And for me personally, it was very much a reminder of the situation when I was a Hungarian refugee back in Hungary, and we had the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, and we ended up coming to Canada as refugees in 1957. So yes, it had a great deal of resonance with me, and certainly as to what we as Canada could do to help. And so it was touched very close to home.
With the news that refugees were coming soon, preparations were underway. Citizenship and immigration, in close cooperation with the Red Cross, were taking the initial steps.
I received a call from my colleagues within the Red Cross to ask if I would assist in establishing a reception center in Trenton, Ontario. So that's how it started, and then we went to a facility south of Trenton, near Belleville, south of Belleville, to a place called Mountain View. And Mountain View is an airfield that's owned by the Department of National Defense that was used ostensibly for warehousing of redundant airplane parts and airplanes that were no longer in use. And what scared me was when I went in, to try to envisage how we would set up a reception center in this. That at one end there was one water tap, and at the other end there was two washrooms, and they hadn't been used for years. The military at that time, and the individuals that were the lead person said, "You tell us what you want, and we'll do it." And so they set up water facilities. They cleaned the place. You wouldn't have recognized it within hours. And a plane that came in of approximately, I'm guessing when I tell you these numbers, but between 240, 260 persons.
Members of the Ademi family were among the first 246 of their countrymen to be flown to Canadian Forces Base Trenton. A chartered Royal Airlines Airbus brought the refugees safely on Tuesday, May the 4th, 1999. The reception went way beyond Mr. Ademi's expectations.
They took care of us during all our stay in the first military base. Then they helped us get settled in the second one, in base Borden, where they put us in rooms with maximum 2 people. They provided the best food for us. Then later, they found permanent housing for each family. They even advised us how to move around, how to protect ourselves.
And they were good organized, and they took care about us, in terms of giving us medical attention and food and shelters and help and everything.
It's interesting that the people that did come in were so appreciative of being there, and they were so humble, and they made no demands, and they were just so happy and respectful, and some of the things that as Canadians we thought we needed to do weren't necessary. But I'll never forget the little girl that came off the first bus, and the bright lights of the television cameras and so forth that were there. And she got off that bus, and I have no idea why she came to me, but she came and sort of grabbed my legs. And of course, I was the tears came. I had no idea what to do, but she was just happy to be on the ground.
By the middle of June 1999, the number of refugees airlifted from Macedonia and Albania had reached 5,051. More family members of the refugees would follow in the next few weeks. The population of Kosovo Albanians in Canada reached the figure of 7,000. 2 Canadian Forces military bases, Trenton in Ontario and Greenwood in Nova Scotia, served as welcome centers and temporary shelters. In partnership with Citizenship and Immigration Canada, the Canadian Red Cross took on a major role in providing services for the refugees housed at Canadian bases in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. Operation Parasol was underway.
We were responsible for basically organizing the interior of the facilities, and setting up cots for respite, and also to set up an area for sleeping area. We had 2 hangars, and we had a whole setup where we had a healthy unit area and for showers and this sort of thing. And so Red Cross was responsible for maintaining the shelter itself, and also for providing food. The food was contracted and through Cara Foods, and they brought the food in, and then it was Red Cross responsibility to distribute the food and to manage the food distribution.
After a temporary stay in Trenton and Greenwood, the refugees were transferred to other military bases in Ontario and the Maritimes.
It happened so fast that by the time I was contacted, and I had to actually leave the very same day in 3 or 4 hours. My duty was to get in there and give them a little bit of an information on where they are and what's going to happen within the next 15 minutes, just to organize that. So I do clearly remember faces of people which didn't really have a clue where they were. They knew they were safe, but again, we were a little bit scared because it was again a military base, and we wanted to assure them that there's nothing to be afraid, that they're now in Canada and they're safe. More or less everything went as planned, actually. There was basically, I remember we worked about 72 hours straight.
Soon after their arrival in Base Borden, the refugees received a very important guest, whose visit would make headlines the next day.
When he visited Camp Borden, actually, I was one of the guys that were actually around him interpreting and helping him, assisting him to communicate with the refugees, as well as introduce him to the media, because there was a press conference after that. It was an interesting fact where actually a prime minister saw some people playing basketball, so didn't wait a second, and he went there and picked up the ball and played for a bit with them. And as a matter of fact, while he was playing, he fell down, and one of the refugees helped him come up. So, of course, next morning, the whole media was with that picture of Prime Minister falling down while playing basketball.
I told him, Mr. Prime Minister, I do apologize, my English is not really good. And he said, it's better than mine. That was really...
One aspect of Canada's involvement in helping the Albanian refugees was through private sponsorships. Hundreds of Canadians signed up as volunteers, assisting refugees in finding accommodation and employment, learning English, and adapting to Canadian life and culture were among the areas of support. Mr. Hossein, a reputable scholar based in Toronto, was one of the many Canadians who responded to the call.
Well, I became a sponsor because my son was working in Kosovo as a journalist. And so because we knew the situation here from the news, how difficult it was there with the war, and he asked us, whether we'll consider sponsoring two brothers. And without hesitation, we said, yes, we'll do it. And as soon as they landed, we picked them up, and they were very, gracious about it. We found accommodation for them on university campus, because I teach at university also. And very soon afterwards, we found jobs for them, and they were very, very, pleased that we were able to help them.
At the end of summer, the Albanian refugees began leaving the military bases. With the undertaking by the Canadian government of financial support for the first 2 years, the refugees, now permanent residents of Canada, were located in a number of cities across the country. To this day, the majority of them live in the same areas where they were established initially: Toronto, Mississauga, Hamilton, Kitchener-Waterloo, Ottawa, Montreal, and Edmonton.
Interesting things happened with the refugees when they initially, we had the first batch come to Kitchener-Waterloo, and so we had to find emergency housing pretty well right away. And I was involved when I was a student at the University of Waterloo with Waterloo Co-op Residence Incorporated, and we had the refugees housed initially at student residence at Dag Hammarskjöld House, which has its own United Nations connections, which was quite appropriate.
We almost became like a family with these refugees. You start to know them, you start to hear their stories, you start to know more about their past, their lives, and you grow more attached to them. And it was kind of difficult at the end, but at the same time, life moves on. So I was happy they were moving out, they were starting fresh new lives in Canada.
Yet, a substantial number of the refugees returned home within the first weeks of their arrival in Canada. Serbian forces' withdrawal and the entry of NATO ground troops in Kosovo on June the 12th convinced them that it was safe to go back. The figure of the repatriated is still disputable.
I recall meeting the first 3 or 4 planes, and like I say, there were perhaps 350 people on average on a plane, so maybe 1,500, 2,000.
Most of the Kosovo Albanians who decided to remain in Canada have been doing very well. Sami Ademi is one of those who set up his own business.
From that point of view, it was a fear for me, will we be successing here? It's what we will do now. We ended up in one new life, new country, and leaving behind everything what we have worked all entire life.
No country is better at integrating people than Canada, because I don't think we put that much emphasis on integrating people. I still love the Canadian model, which is that people tend to adopt the vast majority of the social, cultural, political identity norms that Canada offers, but it still allows people to retain some, remnants, or strong remnants even of their cultural background. From my perspective, the Albanians are very easily fitting into to Canadian society because of the very nature of that.
Are you happy with the life in Canada?
Okay, now it will be 9 years now in Canada. We established our new life here now. I run a small business by myself with my wife. She's helping me, and my oldest son now, he's taking university. He's taking electrical engineering on Ryerson University. Daughter, she's taking a nursing school. So, we slowly are becoming now a Canadian Kosovars here.
The Kosovo Refugee Assistance Program is believed to have cost Canada approximately $200 million. The number of government agencies and non-government organizations involved was enormous, as was the impact on the life of the participants.
I was very proud of my country and what it did to help the Kosovar refugees, honestly. I know that Canada was one of the few countries, for example, that actually gave the Kosovars the option of staying permanently or returning to their home.
Canada is a nation that's made up of immigrants. But outside of the First Nations and Aboriginal people, Canada is a nation of immigrants. And what is interesting is, unlike most countries, Canada doesn't have a dominant group as such. The biggest group is not the French or the English, it's people who came from everywhere else. It's a kind of characteristics. Whenever there's any problem on the planet, we know there's some Canadians at some parts of it are hurting because of what's happening elsewhere. And, having a outlook which looks out to the world, and that's because of what the population is. We are a country made up of people from around the world. So we very much are outward looking, and we recognize the responsibility that we have in terms of assisting people in distress, and that experience was great.
It was certainly the most exciting and most rewarding thing I've ever done in my career, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
What made this operation so much Canadian?
Well, I think the best example would be the number of volunteers that came to wanting to work and to provide assistance in the facility. Over the period of a month, the month of May 1999, it was estimated that we had about 2,000 different volunteers working in the reception center alone, not counting the other facilities at Kingston or Trenton or CFB Borden, but just in the Mountain View Reception Center, approximately 2,000 volunteers. And these volunteers would come from church organizations, from service clubs, and we would provide in-service training for these folks on the bus when they were coming from Peterborough or they're coming from Kingston or Toronto. It was just one example of the community support, particularly within the local area of Trenton and area. Those communities and the people there were very, very, very supportive, as were the businesses that we accessed.
I was delighted that Canada took the initiative to offer a place of refuge. Again, in a refugee crisis that included over 1 million people, 7,000 isn't a significant number in the big picture, but nevertheless, given the distance that Kosovars face vis-a-vis travel to Canada, the Canadian initiative was a tremendous opportunity, and I was delighted that when these people came, as you know, many of them stayed in Canada. My estimate, from my sources, suggests about 50% of Kosovars stayed in Canada, and another 50% returned home once it was safe for them to do so. And I wish them well, of course, in rebuilding their lives either in Kosovo or starting their lives here in Canada.
Well, I'm very proud of Canada for doing that. It was an outstanding effort, and particularly in comparison to what other nations did. Well, a lot of the rest of the world just turned its back, and I include the Muslim world in particular, and Turkey, which is right next door with a 700,000-man army, turned its eyes away while Muslims were being slaughtered and Muslim women were being raped in the Balkans. It was disgusting. So what Canada did was very important. It's not sufficiently understood in the Muslim world, unfortunately, and that is ancient history now because Canada's policy has changed drastically, and it's allied itself with the United States to become more or less, unfortunately, an enemy or an opposition to the Muslim nations. So the good work it did before is being forgotten now.
I have to say I've always been very grateful to the Kosovar community for the tremendous welcome they've always extended to me. I certainly, in terms of my own involvement in all of this, I count myself fortunate to have had the opportunity to help the Kosovars, and I've always been very overwhelmed by the gratitude that has been shown to me. It's hard to put into words actually just how the tremendous feelings I have for the Kosovar community. They've taken me in as one of their own in many respects, and I'm absolutely grateful to them for that.
After the war ended in June 1999, a negotiated agreement secured the autonomy of Kosovo within Serbia under the protection of both UN and NATO troops. After 86 years, the Serb rule had de facto come to an end. However, for the next 9 years, the Kosovo-Albanian political establishment would be pushing the international community for full independence. A return to the pre-war status with Serbs back in control of Kosovo was unthinkable for any Kosovo Albanian. In 2006, the international community decided it was time to take action on the future status of Kosovo. But after the negotiations failed because of Serbia's refusal to accept Kosovo's independence, Albanians went ahead. On February 17, 2008, they declared independence, with the US and the majority of Western countries ready to recognize it.
Botërore që keni gjetë mundësinë e juaj dhe kohën të jeni në Kosovë, dëshiroj t'ju informoj edhe një herë atë që ju keni përcjell me kurreshtje se sot kuvendi i Kosovës ka shpallur pavarësinë e Kosovës.
The actual news that Kosovo is now independent trickled through to the streets.
Well, it's just filtering through here. You may be able to hear gunfire in the background and fireworks and firecrackers being set off. And there's lots of very joyous people here. But the news is just filtering down where we're standing. You can't actually hear the parliamentary, the speeches, but people are starting to hear the noise. And there's music being played, traditional music, drums being beaten.
February 17 of 2008 is the greatest day of my life. It's the greatest day of for my family, because every one of us we lived for this day, and it was really emotional, to be able to watch live how independence in Kosovo will be declared from Kosovo's parliament, and those tears and that crying this time was from happiness and tears of joy. So then when we started to rally to go down and to Queen's Park in that meeting, it was really emotional to see all that lineup of cars and vehicles with Albanian flags who were heading toward the meeting place, and it was something really nice. I regret, I really would like to be at that day among other people in Pristina over there, and to celebrate with them. But we did have a very great time that day too.
Mi tregim shumë shkurt. Kur filloi bombardimi i NATO-s, që ka gjus Nora që ka vdek gjatë luftës, kam pra. Tha, bab, du me festu ditëlindjen. Jam e lirë dhe du me festu ditëlindjen. Po për fat keq, nuk mujti me arrit me festu ditëlindjen, mi pa 15 burger. E jam shumë e lumtur sot, që e di se secili shqiptar, secili fëmijë, mund me festu ditëlindjen i tij.
Bashkonu me mua këtu që të kërkojmë nga shteti kanadez që Kanadaja të rreshtohet me vendet e para që do ta pranojnë shtetin e pavarur Kosovo.
Are you considering going back now that independence has been declared?
The decision to go back now that Kosovo is free and independent is very personal. Of course, it's still an option, especially for me and my wife. But when considering the whole family and kids' future, one looks at the place which offers more opportunities, and Canada is now that place.